They handed me a lesser light and told me hold it tight. But the command was try the spirits, so let's do it right. By their own tests, walk with me. Yeah. 1851, James White put the marker down. The Bible is the perfect rule, the only solid ground. Not at liberty to leave it for a gift or a dream, so we hold it to the standard that the founders set clean. Deuteronomy 18, did the word come to pass? Isaiah 8:20, to the law it won't last. Matthew 7, by the fruit is how you weigh the tree. These are not my rules, beloved, these are theirs, you see. So I'm not moving goalposts, I'm not swinging from the hip. It's their own framework in my hands, and I'm keeping a tight grip. So try the spirits, don't just take the claim. Hold the light to scripture, let the record name. Try the spirits, by the fruits they're known. Weigh it all by the word and the word alone. If it came from the spirit, it could stand the test. Try the spirits, bring it, let the scripture attest. Try the spirits, test it all. Every prophet, every page, hear the apostle call. Not contempt, just honest, let the daylight in. Try the spirits, that's where the freedom begins. Isaiah of age is beautiful, but Veltman ran the trace. Line for line to Hannah, you can follow every place. 31% dependent, one chapter, close to 70. A human pen behind the page, that's the honest history. 1844, the door they said was shut. Predictions with a time stamp, and the time stamp ran up. A few more months, it's nearly done, the calendar declined. Deuteronomy's own measure leaves those words behind. The amalgamation lines, the 1845 affair. I'm not inventing anything, I'm pointing you right there. Try the spirits, by the fruits they're known. Weigh it all by the word and the word alone. If it came from the spirit, it can stand the test. Try the spirits, bring it, let the scripture attest. Try the spirits, test it all. Every prophet, every page, hear the apostle call. Not contempt, just honest, let the daylight in. Try the spirits, that's where the freedom begins. They call it a lesser light to lead you to the greater, but in practice it's the ruler, and the Bible comes in later. She said, no halfway work, it's the spirit or it's not. So I take her at her word and I weigh the whole lot. This is not to wound the ones who love or understand. It's to set the daylight over every human head. Greater light, that's the word, that's the sun on the page. Every wind and new doctrine's got to answer to that gauge. I don't need a second key to be certain of the door. 66 books are sufficient, I am not asking for more. So bring the strongest scholars, bring the record, bring it all. Still man every argument, then let the honest verdict fall. By their fruits, by their tests, by the standard they confess. Try the spirits, beloved, go on, put it to the test. Try the spirits, by their fruits they're known. Weigh it all by the word and the word alone. If it came from the spirit, it can stand the test. Try the spirits, bring it, let the scripture attest. Try the spirits, test it all. Every prophet, every page, hear the apostle call. Not contempt, just honest, let the daylight in. Try the spirits, that's where the freedom begins. To the law and to the testimony, test the spirits, hold to the greater light.
Welcome, friends. It is good to be here again. Seems like it's only been a few days. That's probably because it has been a couple of days So it's good to be back. Grateful to be here. Excited for this conversation. I struggled a little bit with this one because it could have easily been cut into 2 episodes. And we may have made the wrong decision. I don't know. But it's going to be a long one today. And so we're going to cut straight into it. We're going to dive straight in. We're not going to do a lot of announcements or anything. Although I will say this, you definitely are going to want to subscribe, turn on your notifications for, as long as everything goes well, for Friday's conversation. It'll be a humdinger. That's what I'll tell you. It'll be a good one. Hey, let's jump straight into the conversation today. 1864. 1864. In 1864, Sherman is marching on Atlanta. And in fact, in Battle Creek, Michigan, at that same time, Ellen White publishes Spiritual Gifts, Volume 3, which is her visionary retelling of biblical history from creation forward. Chapter 6. If you don't know, chapter 6 is entitled Crime Before the Flood. It builds to one sentence: the sin above all others that made the flood necessary. The sin above all others that made the flood necessary. Here's what the text says on page 64 of the 1864 edition. But if there was one sin above another, which called for the destruction of the race by the flood, it was the base crime of amalgamation of man and beast, which defaced the image of God and caused confusion everywhere. 11 pages later, in chapter 7, she extends it even further. Every species of animal which God had created were preserved in the ark. The confused species, which God did not create, which were the result of amalgamation, were destroyed by the flood. Since the flood, there have been amalgamation of man and beast, as many as may be seen in the almost endless varieties of species of animals and in certain races of men. In certain races of men. Now, whatever amalgamation is, whatever she meant by it, she says that you can see it today in animals and in some human beings. Friends, tonight is hard. It's hard because of the topic in which this potentially can move towards. So let me just say at the very top of this conversation what I am not doing today. I am not going to get angry and shout at you, although I don't know at any point you've seen me do that. I'm not going to read you the most inflammatory construction that these particular words might be in and just say, see, that's it. Call it a day. She's horrible. Ellen White said this. I don't know why you're following her. I'm not going to do that. I don't think that's fair to the discussion. So what I am going to do is I'm going to give the Adventist defense at full strength, the real one, from F.D. Nichols, Herbert Douglass. Then I'm going to show you why that defense is the most damaging thing on record. And before I do that, okay, I'm going to check my audio just a little bit. But once we get done with that, we're going to actually move into a courtroom in Maine. Can you put a comment in the chat if the audio is coming through clear today? And while you're doing that, can you just let me know have you ever heard these types of discussions and conversations? Have you heard any of this? All right. I adjusted some audio. Audio is fine. Audio is good. That's what I'm hearing, is that audio is good. All right. So here's what we're going to do today. We have 5 detailed sessions. And friends, there is a lot to cover. There's a lot to cover. Welcome back to episode 13. It's, again, as I probably don't need to remind those of you that have been here the whole entire series, it's the same lens. Okay, so we are looking at this through a reform, like I am Protestant, sola scriptura. We're going to steel man this position first at full strength. We are going to try to do as best we can. We are going to try to not misrepresent the actual position of the Adventist system, and then we will answer it. No paraphrase free, being represented. We're going to quote these exactly the way they are, okay? Now, tonight, what really matters the most, because this is some of the strongest evidence in the case from men and amalgamation and dealing with challenging statements that have been made. What we are going to do tonight as we dig through is we are going to start on Act 2 next, which is the 1864 amalgamation passages. We will move then into the racial record after 1864. Once we get through those 2 segments, we will then segue into the 1845 Israel Damon trial. And at that point, which will be a long session, by the way, at that point, we will then go to the final verdict of this particular episode and this particular part of the series. This one runs long, definitely past 2 hours, although last one was 3. I hope that it will be less than that. I decided not to cut this down because I think that we need to keep these in 2 of the same 2 topics that need to go together. Every single exhibit that you will look at this evening, which is evidence, will be primary documentation. You are welcome to get some of these documents if you don't know where to find them by joining the Discord chat. I'm happy to share any of this with you. This is not my private information. It's just research is what it is. I'd rather you have the documents, and I'd rather you make the decision based on the research. So one more thing before we get started. We are going to be talking about Ellen White. Ellen White is loved by many. That is not something that I will debate. Many people appreciate or believe that they appreciate her writings. And so that impacts very real people. A segment of those individuals that it impacts are going to be Black Adventists. These passages engage in those places, and they have been carried to extents that have caused damage, real damage on people's lives. And so the cost is great. I know that this comes at a time in the world's history, especially American history, where this topic is very sensitive. So we're going to deal with it that way. We're going to engage it in a very sensitive but yet very serious manner. So first, let's get into the actual documents themselves. So three notes that we will pay attention to as we engage in this today. First of all, the test itself. Remember, we went through some of this, but remember, the test is not my test. The test that we are looking at here are texts, and the test that the denomination itself, the Seventh Adventist Church itself, utilizes or claims to utilize to test prophets. Now, they claim that Ellen White passes with flying colors, but remember, Matthew 7:15-20, which we'll look at in just a second, is their own traditions, is the Seventh-day Adventist's own position, one of them, to test a prophet. All the way back on episode 10, I referenced George Knight, the 1997 edition and work that names this specific passage as one of the 4 biblical tests of a prophet. In fact, Ellen White invokes this passage on herself with regards to herself. She regards it in testing the spirits as well. Secondly, the question here, and I want to be very careful here, the question here is not, was Ellen White perfect? I always get people saying, Mike, you're too detailed. You care. You're just splitting hairs. You think that she has to be perfect because she claimed to be a prophet, or other people claimed that she was a prophet. Every Christian leader has failures. Every Christian leader. This is not what we're talking about. Luther had failures with regards to the Jews. Edwards, if you know who he is, had failures with regards to slavery. If the standard were sinlessness, no one survives. Now, I do understand that Adventism does teach a framework of sinlessness, that at some point some will be actually sinless. We're not going into that particular claim today, okay? The question that we're asking is much narrower than that. The question is actually what the tradition itself, what the Seventh-day Adventist Church claims with regards to this particular issue. Nobody says that Luther's words came from God. Nobody says that Edwards' name comes from God. Nobody says that Mark Finley or Doug Batchelor or Max Lucado, or you put your favorite Charles Spurgeon, whoever it is. No one says that those individuals' words come from God. But it's different with regards to Ellen White, because that is exactly what her claim is. She's not just claiming to be someone who is spiritual that's kind of sharing some information and take it for what you want. These that we're going to look at are published as visions in God's voice. So the question is whether that voice was directly attached to just teaching and conduct in general, or if that conduct can be separated or pass the very test that Jesus gave in Matthew 7:15-20. So please, those of you that are Adventist supporters, don't come at me in the comments as saying, Mike, Ellen White was just a human. I'm not making that argument. I'm not saying she had to be perfect. Her statements are in the visionary register. None of the other prophets, for the most part, in fact, most of even the canonical scriptures are not in the visionary register. Some are, most are not. Ellen White makes a very different claim with regards to her specific writings. The third thing, and again, I'm being very careful here with being careful with people is not the same as being careful with the evidence. Unfortunately, what we will be discussing today, because of the sensitivity of the actual topic, this material hurts. It will hurt. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But friends, softening a reading from Ellen White because the subject is loved is not kindness. It assumes you cannot handle the truth about someone that you might love. It assumes that you can't understand, you can't deal with the truth of Ellen White, even though you might dearly cherish her. And I think you can. I think you can address this topic with spiritual maturity because we are testing the Spirit. Now, I do want to mention and remind you of the actual test. This is taken from Matthew 7, 15 to 20. We don't have all of the verses on the screen, but here is what it says. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. This is not my test, friends. This is a test that Jesus himself asks us to test against all prophets. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's dive into this segment, and let me give you just a little bit of context here. This is not a private letter or a marginal note. What we're looking at first is a published book. This book is published in the Visionary Register. This book is retelling the chapters from Genesis, chapter by chapter. So if we're looking at the genre of the book itself, this is not a letter, this is not a note, this is Visionary Register retelling Genesis chapter by chapter. Secondly, chapter 6 catalogs the pre-flood evils. Idolatry under the groves, polygamy. In fact, she says that God gave Adam one wife, quote, showing to all who should live upon the earth his order and law in that respect. That is a statement towards one wife, one husband. It's a statement with regards to polygamy. She refers to theft and violence and murder, then goes into meat eating, which she says increased, specifically meat eating, increased their ferocity until they, quote, look upon the blood of human beings with astonishing indifference. And then the climax, chapter 7, where she says, quote, but if there was one sin above another. Now, two things worth kind of holding while we have this conversation. First is that this is the climax. This is not an aside. This isn't a side conversation. The one sin above all others that called for the destruction of the race, this is the culmination, this is the climax, is amalgamation. Secondly, those are only two occurrences of the word in the entire volume. So this is a book, but we have two occurrences of amalgamation, two sentences, and I double-checked, triple-checked, quadruple-checked against the text. If you find another one, please let me know. The two instances are 11 pages apart. There isn't anything else. Okay? Now, with regards to this comment and this thought, this is page 64. This is with what surrounds the conversation, just to give full context to the discussion. She says on page 63 and 64 in context, they loved to destroy the lives of animals. They used them for food, and this increased their ferocity and violence and caused them to look upon the blood of human beings with astonishing indifference. Astonishing indifference. Astonishing indifference. But if there was one sin above another which called for the destruction of the race by the flood, it was the base crime of amalgamation of man and beast, which defaced the image of God and caused confusion everywhere. God proposed to destroy by a flood that powerful, long-lived race that had corrupted their ways before him. Now, this comes after the catalog of all the details and sits on top of it. This is the culmination. To just kind of note the two effects being stated. It defaced the race, it defaced the image of God, and two, it caused confusion everywhere. Okay? Just hold those closely because they matter. It's going to matter in a few minutes with regards to those statements. Now, moving ahead, remember 11 pages apart, moving ahead to page 75. You can see this again. This time, only the sentence that does the work of what's happening with regards to amalgamation. And I quote, since the flood, there has been amalgamation of man and beast, as may be seen in the almost endless varieties of species of animals and in certain races of men. Now, everything turns on the grammatical structure or the grammar that's in question with regards to that specific statement. Since the flood, there has been amalgamation of man and beast. So one process, amalgamation, ongoing post-flood. As may be seen in, what does she say? As may be seen in, and she is now telling you specifically where to look for the evidence of this claim. And she says two things: the almost endless varieties of species of animals, that's the first one, and two, certain races of men. Now remember, all of this hangs on the grammar of what she's saying. Two visible results: animal variety and certain races of men. So if you question, if you question the whole night, all of this that's going on, the question itself rests on two things. On the left-hand side, since the flood, there has been amalgamation of man and beast. We went through the grammatical structure of what it is that she's saying physically, but what does she mean? What is, quote, amalgamation of man and beast? What is it? Well, in one reading, you could have amalgamation of man with beast. In other words, human-animal interbreeding. That's one way that you could read it. Reading 2 would be amalgamation of man and amalgamation of beast. Races of men mixing, and then species of animals mixing. Those are the only two options that are available. Now, you need to know that the second reading is the church's defense. Now, those of you that are paying close attention, I just have to point this out. Those of you that are paying close attention to my spelling of defense, I am spelling it the British way and not the American way. If you see it change back and forth, that's just a thing, right? Defense is spelled with an S, and it can be spelled with a C. Depends. Kind of depends. Now, I believe, the Adventist position has taken the second reading as what they believe Ellen White to be saying. I actually, and we'll go through that, I actually think that actually does more damage. But just wait until you see what exactly I mean by that. So first, what does amalgamation mean in the 1860s? What does it mean? Now, here's what I could have done. In fact, I almost thought about going all the way back here. That book right there on my shelf, that one right there is an 1860s dictionary. And I almost thought about, like showing you, going through. I could do that. I could. That's not really the direction that I think is valuable. But in the mid-19th century American English, amalgamation was the standard term for racial intermarriage. That was the standard term. Just putting it out there. We're working through all the details. Now, F.D. Nichols, who is the editor of the Review and Herald at the time, and also if you look behind me over here, you will see this is the book that F.D. Nichols published with regards to Ellen G. White and the critics. His 1951 book that I just showed you is the standard Adventist reply. And if you're wanting to know, okay, chapter 20 is entirely dedicated to these two sentences, entirely dedicated to it. Crazy. I know. Okay. And what is it that he says? Well, he says this, and I'll just read it. Okay. This is F.D. Nichols, page 309. Well, let me get it on the screen for you if I can get it for you. Here it is. He says this: in the mid 19th century, the word was commonly employed in the United States to describe the intermarriage of white and the Negro race. Now, I am reading things currently from quotes that are not popular today. You would not be reading this kind of stuff today. I am simply reading it. Okay. So again, this is why I gave the sensitive note at the very beginning, because I know these types of words bring sensitivity and bring a lot of heartache and pain from the history of America. So this was a common way of describing, based on F.D. Nichol, intermarriage between the white race and the Negro race, based on his kind of definition or clearing his understanding of the situation. Now, he goes on, okay, he's going to actually go on to use a dictionary. Do I have this in my notes here? I want to make sure that I have the dictionary itself in my notes, just so you have it. Yeah, he goes on to say this with regards to his own footnote. Okay, so I could have pulled this off of my shelf and given you a definition, but here's what he says. Okay, the Century Dictionary edition of 1889. This is in a footnote for F.D. Nichols. Says under amalgamation, to the second definition. The mixing or blending of different things, especially of races. The 1949 printing of Funk and Wagnall's New Standard Dictionary says, under amalgamation, to form into a compound by mixing or blending, unite, combine, as to amalgamate diverse races, used specifically in the southern United States of marriage between white and black persons. A Dictionary of American English says, and this is 1859, Bartlett, amalgamate is universally applied in the United States to the mixing of the black and white races. Now, universally applied, that is what he's saying in the footnote. Universally applied in the United States to the mixing of the black and white races. That's Bartlett, 1859, cited as a footnote in F.D. Nichols' own defense in this book right here that I'm pointing to. Now, that's 5 years before she wrote the thing that we read. So the racial meaning of that word is not something a critic is going to import. That's not me importing something onto this idea. It is asserted. It's documented by one of your, as an Adventist, your Adventist apologist cited footnote to support, which is what happens in good citations. 3 dictionaries. And this is the book, okay, the Ellen White and her critics. This is the book by the church's principal defender, published in conjunction to deal with these things, because his defense, unfortunately, does not work. Remember, he's defending the second understanding. His defense will not work unless he provides support with it. Now, 4 years after Spiritual Gifts, Volume 3, Uriah Smith, which is the editor of the Review and Herald, the most influential Adventist writer of his generation, he publishes a book answering 52 objections to Ellen White's visions. Now, this is Battle Creek. Look at the date. It's 1868. This is objection 39. Okay, that has the title. Now, for any of you wondering, I am not drinking beer. I actually today, since I do this usually with something to wet my whistle, this is actually a raspberry, I don't know if you can see it. This is a raspberry black tea. It's actually quite refreshing. I've got it in here because, well, I want it to stay cold. So, just so you all know the context of what's in here. Some of you might go nuts if you thought it was something else. All right, here is what is said. Now, for context, okay, objection 39 in this book is titled "The Negro Race Not Human." Yes, you heard me. That is the title, okay? You may be surprised, but that is the title of the chapter. The Negro Race Not Human. Yes, you heard right. Now, again, the church's own periodical editor printing that as a section highlight, a section, like, it's on page 102, friends. Go check it out. The objection 39 is the Negro race not human. So printing that as a section heading is there because the charge was already in circulation 4 years on. It's already there, okay? Now, here is his response. Now, I'm just showing you kind of the statement here. I got a little ahead of myself on this, but can you imagine? This is the title. Okay, this is objection 39. This is the title of the section. Friends, understand the circumstances. This is what we call historical context. And yes, it is 100% horrible. Now, I understand they're human, right? Yeah, I get it, okay? But this is what is said by Uriah Smith, okay? 1869. He says this: "The visions teach," says the objector, okay? He's kind of going through. "The visions teach," says the objector, "that the Negro race is not human. We deny it. They do not so teach. Mark the language." And here is the quote. "This view," quote, "was given for the purpose of illustrating the deep corruption and crime into which the race fell, even within a few years after the flood. There was amalgamation, and the effect is still, pay attention, is still visible in certain races of men. Mark, those accepting the animals upon whom the effects of this work are visible are called by the vision men. That's what they're called. This is the definition he's giving. Now, we have ever supposed that anybody that was called a man was considered a human being. We're being very intentional with what's going on here, okay? So his defense, Uriah Smith's defense, is not, well, she didn't mean the races or products of amalgamation. That's not his defense. His defense is she called them men. So we haven't denied their humanity. That's his defense. He concedes the amalgamation piece. What he denies, he only denies the inference. Now, he then is going to go a little bit further, and this is the sentence that honestly I didn't expect. I will be surprised, unless you've seen it already, I will be surprised if any of you expect this based on what you've already seen. Okay? And this is what is next. But does anyone deny the general statement contained in the extract given above? Do they not? If they did, they could easily be silenced by a reference to such cases as the wild Bushmen of Africa, some tribes of the Hottentots, and perhaps the Digger Indians of our own country. Moreover, naturalists affirm that the line of demarcation between the human and animal races is lost in confusion. It is impossible, as they affirm, to tell just where the human ends and the animal begins. Can we suppose that this was so ordained of God in the beginning? Rather, has not sin marred the boundaries of these two kingdoms? Seriously, this is Uriah Smith's support and defense of Ellen White's amalgamation statement. Certain races of men. In 1864, she does not say which. This is 4 years later. In 1868, the editor of the Review and Herald physically names, yes, 3 of them, physically names them. Bushmen of Africa, the Hottentots, and even the Digger Indians. And what he says is that anyone who doubts the doctrine that Ellen White taught, that she saw in vision, if anyone doubts it, they can be easily silenced. That's his terms. Could they be easily silenced by looking at these 3 as examples? By looking at them? I mean, you can't distinguish, you can hardly distinguish between human and animal with them. Now, Uriah Smith does deserve a steel man. That's what we do, okay? So, out of fairness, letting him speak for himself, not me inserting, out of fairness, let's see how he goes on. But what has the ancient sin of amalgamation to do with any race or people at the present time? Are they in any way responsible or to be held accountable for it? Not at all. Has anyone a right to try to use it to their prejudice? By no means. Whatever race of men we may take, Bushmen, Hottentots, Patagonias, or any class of people, however low they may apparently be in the scale of humanity, their mental capabilities are in every instance the basis on which we are to work. Yeah, Lord have mercy. Absolutely crazy stuff. Now, if you take this seriously, what is being said, okay? What Smith is saying is he's not urging anyone to mistreat anyone. You'll notice it in the text. Don't use it as a prejudice against, okay? In 1868, terms that he thinks it would be a prejudice, he's being, I guess, generous, okay? That is not exactly the problem here. The problem here is that the doctrine is so plainly racial that its own defender has to append a paragraph telling you not to use it to their prejudice. That's what's happening. You do not need that paragraph unless the doctrine that Ellen White preached in the Visionary Register in her book, unless that doctrine of amalgamation or that position from God of amalgamation supplies the prejudice that he's actually talking about. Now, here's what's interesting. 2 weeks before that book went out, you want to know what was run? I'll show you what ran in the Review and Herald. This is what ran 2 weeks. Okay, 2 weeks before. This is what ran in the Review and Herald. The association has just published a pamphlet entitled, quote, "The Visions of Mrs. E.G. White, a Manifestation of Spiritual Gifts According to the Scriptures." That's Uriah Smith. It is written by the editor of the Review. While carefully reading the manuscript, I felt very grateful to God that our people could have this able defense of those views which they so much love and prize, and which others despise and oppose. This book, The Visions of Mrs. Ellen G. White, a manifestation of that book, this book is designed for a very wide circulation. There will be 2,000 copies upon the campground. Price 20 cents, postage 2 cents. Careful reading of the manuscript. Her husband read it before it was printed. Ellen White's own husband read it before it was printed, called it an able defense. It was James White who ordered the 2,000 copies to be at the campground. So until this week, okay, I had it only through a 1982 article, and the 1982 transcription is 3 words off. Okay, this is actually, and again, I try to do very, very, very intentional work, because this is where critics, a lot of my friends, okay, this is where critics overreach with regards to this. So, Ellen White never said one word about Smith's defense, publicly or privately. Nichol actually makes that statement and point, and he's right. I haven't found anything, okay? So her silence is not an endorsement, but her silence is not a correction either. It cuts both ways. And 2 years later, in 1870, she actually reprinted both sentences without changing a single thing. So if it was a concern, there was plenty of time for her to retract it or rewrite it or rephrase it. We've seen that happen already in this episode, in this series. Now, Nichols is going to open by stating the charge. This is in the book that I showed you that's on my, just behind my left shoulder over here. And he states it very fairly. Okay, here's the charge. This is page 306. Mrs. White teaches that before the flood and also afterward, men cohabited with beasts and that the offspring constituted certain depraved races of men today. That's the charge, okay? She is here simply revealing a credulous belief in ancient myths regarding strange creatures produced by unholy alliances between human beings and beasts. So he concedes, Nichols, on his own authorship, concedes at the outset that some Adventists have read her that way. And this is what he says. Those who believe in her writings have given two explanations. Some have held that she taught not only that men and beasts have cohabited, but others that progeny resulted. Now, the beast hybrid reading, okay, progeny, the beast hybrid amalgamation reading is not the church's defense. In fact, Nichols goes on, he's going to reject that entire defense. So let me just show you the real defense that Nichols gives, because that's what we do here. We're going to steelman it. I'm not going to say what I think she meant or didn't mean. We're going to see what they actually state, and then we're going to see if it holds. Because if you only ever hear the caricature, the first informed Adventist you meet will probably blindside you. So we need to be prepared. What actually is the defense? What actually is the defense? Now, I'm going to read some additional stuff here, and then you'll see some other items kind of on the screen. So the crux of the amalgamation passage is this. Amalgamation of man and beast, that statement could be construed to mean amalgamation of man with beast or amalgamation of man and of beast. In a construction like this, the preposition of is not necessarily repeated, though it may be clearly implied. We might speak of the scattering of man and beast over the earth, but we do not therefore mean that previous man and beast were fused in one mass at one geographical spot. The passage would be speaking of the amalgamation of the different races of mankind and the amalgamation of different races of animals. Okay, so just real quick. So the scattering of man and beast does not, based on Nichols' position, does not mean they were scattered together. it means the scattering of man and the scattering of beast, two parallel processes. So Nichol, again, here's what he says. He says, we believe that let me make sure I got this on the screen for everyone. We believe that the meaning of the key phrase in question is found by understanding it to read, quote, amalgamation of man and of beast. Thus, the passage would be speaking of the amalgamation of different races of mankind and the amalgamation of different races of animals. Okay. Now, here's kind of a summary of what we're looking at. Okay. So his own words. Okay. This is the summary. So we have the amalgamation of man. Okay. This is Nichol's reading of the first effect named in the 1864 sentence, the amalgamation of man. And then we have the amalgamation of beast. Okay. So he will go. So page 314, he goes on and says, we believe these parallel passages fully warrant the conclusion already reached that when Mrs. White said amalgamation of man and beast, she meant one, okay, the amalgamation of races of men, and two, the amalgamation of species of animals. The first defaced the image of God, and the second caused confusion everywhere. So, two parallel processes, one sentence. Now, he is going to go on. He then supports this from Ellen White's own writings. He goes to Patriarchs and Prophets, page 81 and 82, on the sons of Seth intermarrying with the daughters of Cain. That's Patriarchs and Prophets. And then on Patriarchs and Prophets 338, with regards to polygamy as, quote, one of the sins that brought the wrath of God into the diluvian world. Now, I'm not just a side excursus, okay? I would love to spend 30, 45 minutes just talking about her statement in Patriarchs and Prophets on Seth intermarrying with the daughters of Cain. That is entirely unbiblical, okay? Maybe at some point I'll do an episode on that. But I'm just going to let that sit for the time being, okay? There is nothing in the text that actually even warrants the reading that Ellen White gets with regards to Seth intermarrying with the daughters of Cain, and one is evil and one is good, and that's what Genesis 6 is specifically engaging in. But that is their stance, okay? That's the stance. Now, if we go to a more modern, if we want to go to a more modern official version of this, you may be familiar with Herbert Douglass. I, again, have this book on the upper shelf right there. Messenger of the Lord, 1998. This is a more modern translation or modern understanding. This is the standard denominational handbook on the prophetic gift. And here's what is said. No dictionary has ever used amalgamation to describe the cohabitation of man with beast. 19th century usage, including the mixing of diverse races. Granted, her statement could appear ambiguous. Does she mean amalgamation of man with beast or amalgamation of man and of beast? Often, repetition of the preposition is omitted in similar construction. Mrs. White never hinted of subhuman beings or any kind of hybrid animal-human relationships. Now, short, concise, okay, that is the defense kind of at full strength. Take it for what it is, okay? It is an argument, okay? And on the narrow question of beast hybrids, I think it probably substantially succeeds, although you're going to see some challenges, some real challenges with this particular reading, okay? Here's what you should know, okay? I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's what you should know. The reading that I just gave you, okay? Nichol's reading, the one in pretty much every Seventh-day Adventist response today, that reading was adopted at a meeting. That reading. So this is not a standard reading. September the 8th, 1947, in a meeting near San Francisco, there was 15 of the church's highest officials, including General Conference President James McElhaney, along one side of a long table. Facing them were two Adventist biologists. A little bit of Adventist history here. Behind the biologists were shelves of Ellen White's publications. Milton Kern, president of the board of trustees of the Ellen G. White publications, chaired the meeting. It began actually shortly after 9 in the morning. And the question before the table, you guessed it, what did she mean? What did Ellen White actually mean? Now, there are two things here that you need to be aware of, okay? First of all, you need to be introduced to Dr. Frank L. Marsh. Dr. Frank L. Marsh argued that the reading that you have just heard, that we've just gone through, Amalgamation of Man and of Beast, and he cited Bartlett's 1859 Dictionary of Americanisms, the same exact source that Nichols ends up using later on. So this is a very real thing that's going on. Next, you have Dr. Harold W. Clark, who argued that she meant exactly what she appeared to mean. Now, please understand that Dr. Clark was not a critic. He was a creationist. He was a colleague. He was a friend. The account says that two men opened by complimenting each other, and that the officials were relieved to see this. Now, before I give you Clark's argument, I want you to notice where Marsh's argument actually came from. Okay? Marsh's argument, and I want to make sure that, Marsh's case rests on the science. Let me go back one more slide, okay? It rests on the science itself. Creatures of different kinds cannot cross. Therefore, she cannot have meant that particular thing. It's reasonable. And it's reasonable for a biologist in 1947 to come to that particular conclusion. It was also not a new thought. This actually had been in print for roughly 20 years as an attack, and as a specific attack. And I want you to hear this. This is actually E.S. Ballinger. He's running the gathering call out of Riverside, California. This is in his publication of The Word to the Little Flock. Remember the one last episode that I showed you? I decided not to pull it out too much more because I don't want to put a lot of wear and tear on it. It is a very old piece of document. And so this is the section in that particular appeal. Remember, that was a republication that Ballinger printed A Word to the Little Flock, as it was originally published, and then he has some additional things in it that he states on it. And this is what he says. This is with regards to, under the section heading, Mrs. White Teaches Evolution. Quote, "But such amalgamation is a physical impossibility, not only between man and the lower animals, but between all the species of the entire animal kingdom. Scientists have been trying for generations to cross the various species, but have met with complete failure. Such closely allied animals as the horse and the donkey can be crossed, as we see in our common mule, but the mule never produces an offspring." Okay, so same objection, same reasoning, same example, okay, nearly. So a critic used this particular idea to say that her passage was false. That's what Ballinger is saying. 20 years later, a defender uses this exact argument to say that that's what her passage, well, her passage never meant that. So understand that early on in the history of this, the argument was there's no way that this could have been. Ballinger is saying this is a false teaching. She's teaching evolution. Now, I'm not suggesting that Marsh took it from Ballinger. That's not what I'm saying. I have no evidence for that. The point is about what an argument can do. Amalgamation is biologically impossible, is a fact about biology. That's just a fact. It tells you absolutely nothing about a woman in 1864 and what she believed. It doesn't say anything about what she believed. It can be pointed two separate directions. And here's what the facts show. Within one generation of it, it actually does point two different ways. And Ballinger does us a favor on the way, kind of as he's going through. He actually quotes both passages and cites them to The Spirit of Prophecy by Ellen White, page 69, published in 1870, and then page 78. So you have a hostile witness. That's what this is. A hostile witness in the 1920s confirming the 1870 pages independently. Now, here is Dr. Clark's argument. Dr. Clark says this: if one diagrammed the expression, "one sin above another" was amalgamation of man and beast, one could see that man and beast stand in the same relation in the sentence. They are coordinates. Whatever applies to one applies to the other, and it is impossible to make the amalgamation of beast with beast or man with man, the one sin greater than idolatry, adultery, polygamy, theft, or murder. Now, this is the point that I made several minutes ago, that I made earlier on. Okay? I didn't get it from a critic. Remember who this is. This is an Adventist biologist, Pacific Union College, arguing for one of the two potential options that Ellen White meant with regards to amalgamation in a very small, separate, small meeting with the conference president and all of these bigwigs dealing with this problem. This is not my position. This is not, I made it up. Mike Colburn, you're a critic. No, it is the argument of an Adventist biologist arguing in front of the General Conference president. Now, here's what you get on page 12. Such an interpretation did violence to the language Ellen White actually used. On the contrary, two conclusions were clear. Ellen White knew what she meant to say, and she clearly intended her readers to interpret the base crime as a sexual act that included the crossing of man and beast. Now, Clark has a witness list, okay? A witness list. He had worked directly with W.C. White, which is her son, Ellen White's son. He worked with Willie White, and he worked with D.E. Robinson, which is her secretary. So please understand, Dr. Clark worked with Ellen White's son and secretary. And he says this: both Robinson and Willie White definitively believed that Ellen White meant amalgamation of man with beast. Now, 16 years earlier, okay, when George McCready Price had proposed inserting the word of, there was actually someone that, hey, we should insert this into our writings, okay, which is the exact move that the church now makes. Robinson, okay, which is the secretary at the time, Robinson published a reply saying that the insertion did violence to the obvious meaning the author herself intended. Now, both men, remember, it started just after 9 o'clock. Both men finished 10:15. Questions ran until lunch. About a third of the group did not come back. They were supposed to. A third of the group. It adjourned at 3 o'clock without a vote. It was supposed to, but it was without a vote. Kern and Marsh agreed afterwards that if a vote had been taken, it would have gone at worst 12-3 in Marsh's favor. Why? Well, Shigley says that it's better than I would. And I'm gonna actually show you what Shigley says. Who is Shigley? Well, this is actually the Adventist graduate student that was writing this particular article in dealing with all of this. He sent this reconstruction to both Marsh and Clark for correction before publishing this. So, need anyone say, oh, this is wrong? Here is what Gordon Shigley said. Unable to reconcile the most obvious reading of Ellen White's statements with science and with a commitment to the genetic equality among races, the church has accepted Marsh's ingenious interpretation of what Ellen White meant. Now, this is not, friends, this is not a hostile outside magazine. Some might not like Spectrum, but Spectrum, this is written by an Adventist graduate student who sent his reconstruction to both Marsh and Clark for correction before publishing it. Now, 4 years after that meeting, 1947, F.D. Nichols wrote the book that I've been quoting. Marsh told Shigley what happened next. In 1951, when F.D. Nichol was preparing his Ellen G. White and her critics, he requested all of Marsh's papers on amalgamation. Marsh sent them to him, and Nichol leaned heavily on them for his chapter on the amalgamation statements. And then in 1968, the White estate began issuing Nichol's chapter as a standalone paper, Ellen G. White Statements Regarding Conditions at the Time of the Flood. Now, Shigley, writing in 1982, says this: "This is still the paper sent to those who request an official statement on Ellen G. White and amalgamation." So the official Adventist answer to these two sentences is a reading that was arrived at by a committee in 1947. Friends, understand that. 1947. It was written back in the 1960s. Over the objection of a fellow creationist who said it did violence to Ellen White's own language and against the recorded belief of her own son and her own secretary. It was adopted. It was adopted on the reconstruction of the account because the alternative could not be reconciled with genetics or with racial equality. Friends, wanting a reading that is compatible with racial equality is definitely a good impulse. I'm glad that they want it. That doesn't mean that that's what she said, though. Wanting a text to mean something is not evidence that that is what it means. Don't be ignorant to how this comes together. Now, 3 things that I want to work through. Answer 1. If I grant the defense and I read what it leaves, and just read what it leaves you with, okay? On Nichol's own reading, amalgamation of man, okay? Amalgamation of man. What that means on Nichol's own reading is it means the intermarriage of races of men. So certain races of men are actually what they appear to be. They are unidentifiable present day human races, named as the visible product of a mixing process. And that process in her sentence, keep it in context, that process is what defaced the image of God and is what is called the base crime. The Adventist position's own defense does not remove racial prejudice. In fact, their own defense makes it worse. It effectively rescues Ellen White from teaching that some people are part animal, but it rescues her at the price of establishing that she taught racial mixing was the crime that caused the flood. Sound like maybe Nazi thoughts? Pure blood? This stuff sickens me. It absolutely sickens me. Answer 2. Nichols concedes the phrase that actually matters. In fact, this is what Nichols says on page 100. Mrs. White does not comment on the phrase, quote, certain races of men. She gives no details as to how the races intermingled after the flood, nor does she say that such post-diluvian intermingling was a base crime. We need only to note that she makes the simple statement that amalgamation produces races of men, not races part man and part animal. He explicitly says she does not comment on the phrase. The 4 words that put living human beings inside that sentence, she never explains. And the church's best defender claims that in a footnote. And let me just read from Nichols' own body of text on the same page. He says this, he's going to go on. Now that all the savage races are fairly well known, this is Nichols. Now that all the savage races are well known, the testimony of those who have come in contact with them is that though they may be depraved, they are exceedingly human in every respect and need only the opportunity to acquire the white man's habits and vices. Make me throw up. That is Nichols' own defense, 1951. Talk about racism. Goodness gracious. Friends, you don't believe me? Pick the book up and read it. There is major racism inside the Adventist institution. By the way, there's still black and white churches, segmented. And I know Ellen White said that blah, 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 whatever. It all comes from this crap. It's absolutely disgusting, is absolutely right. I'm going to read this again. Now that all savage races are fairly well known, F.D. Nichols here, the testimony of those who have come in contact with them is that though they may be deprived, they are exceedingly human in every respect and need only the opportunity to acquire the white man's habits and vices. That's what Adolf Hitler taught. Like, what is this junk? Absolutely disgusting. I gotta find my notes here. This is getting me all worked up. There you go. I had it in my notes. Here's the quote, friends. All right. So here's the reality, okay? Nichol, page 314, assigns defaced the image of God. He assigns that to the human amalgamation and, quote, caused confusion everywhere to the animal one. That's what he does, okay? Now, the attorney, David Reed, okay, this is attorney David Reed in it's called Dinosaurs, an Adventist View, okay, quoted actually approvingly by someone that you might know, Judd Lake in Ellen White Under Fire, which I have literally right there over my shoulder, three of them, okay. he assigns defaced the image of God to the animal amalgamation. Now, I want to let me get this one. I don't have it in my. Here we go. Yeah, I've got it here for you. I'll put it on the screen. I got it. Okay. Here we go. Here's what this is actually taken from Judd Lake. Okay, Ellen White Under Fire. And here's the section on this. This is what page is this on? This is page 73. Let me move over so everyone can see it. This is on page 73. I need to zoom out just a little bit, don't I? Here we go. Let me get this out just a bit and adjust it. Oh, y'all can't see it. Hold on a second, friends. Just hold on a second. I got to get it to where you all can see this. So give me a second. Adjust this. Adjust it just a little bit so y'all can see this better. Hey, how's that? There we go. All right, so here's Judd Lake, okay? And notice he's quoting from Dinosaurs, an Adventist View, and he's quoting this approvingly, okay? Before the flood, the antediluvians artificially combined characteristics of widely dissimilar species. That type of amalgamation was sinful and resulted in species that were combinations of entirely different classes of animals. It substantially deranged and confused the created order and defaced the image of God. That type of amalgamation was first among the reasons why God decided to wipe the slate clean with a worldwide deluge and start over with only the original created kinds. I'm sorry. You can't make this up. So you can see that is quoted as a support. Okay. Now, I want to take you to our good old friend Herbert Douglass, who says on page 492, we recognize, however, that serious students of Ellen White's writings differ on what she meant by amalgamation. So here's what we have to understand. A sentence published, remember, this is Ellen White stating this in the Visionary Register. On the cause, again, on the cause of the destruction of the human race. This is not just a small side excursus, which Adventism's own serious students can't even agree on what it means and what's going on. 172 years later, and they don't even know what it is. I don't know. And no matter which way you parse it, it's horrible either way. And this is supposed to be something that was from God. Now, again, you've seen this before. Another piece of evidence that we have been looking through, okay? I'm not going to use this as, I want to be very clear on this, because you need to be aware of all the information that's out there, which evidence you use to kind of support your position itself. That's up to you. When I share information with you, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm endorsing every bit of these items as full evidence proof. I make it very clear, and I state it very clearly. Hey, this is a little spurious. Hey, this is a little whatever, okay? But you need to be aware of, this is 1866. This is in context to Ellen White. Remember these two gentlemen, Snook and Brinkerhoff. We've looked at this before. Here's the full quote. Now, again, I'm reading all of it, but these visions teach that the Negro race is not human. This charge they deny, but he will let the reader decide for himself. Here is what she says. And then he goes on and quotes. Now to the quote on the screen. He literally will quote what it is that she said that we've already looked at, right? The amalgamation concepts. But what are we to understand by certain races of men? She has not informed us in her writings, but left us to fix the stigma of amalgamation where we may see fit. But the interpretation has come to light. She told it to her husband, and he made it known to Elder Ingraham, and he divulged the secret to the writer that Sister White had seen that God never made the darky. Holy Toledo. Now, that sounds crazy, right? And here's the thing. Here's the thing you got to understand about this. If that was actually able to be confirmed as fact, it would be horribly damning. It would be horribly damning. Okay. But here's the thing you need to know. Okay. The chain is 4 links long. Understand that this is what Snook is saying. Ellen White made it known to James White. James White made it known to Elder Ingram. Elder Ingram made it known to the White writer. The writer. Okay. So Snook does not claim to have heard it from Ellen White. It's a rumor. And again, I don't care how convenient the rumor is. This is part of the reason why. You should be aware of it. You don't need it, okay? But you should be aware of it. Secondly, they are partisans. In other words, ex-ministers, disfellowshipped. You know this about Snook. Like, you know this, right? Publishing to discredit Ellen White. That never looks good. But here's what you got to understand. Just because someone's publishing what they know to be true, that doesn't make them liars. It does mean their unsupported hearsay cannot carry the full evidence. It shouldn't carry the full evidence. It shouldn't carry the charge as serious as it sounds. Thirdly, you need to be aware of this and I'm sharing this as a good researcher, the copy everyone quotes from is not the 1866 original. It is a 2015 retypeset made from a web transcription. The original ran 27 pages. The retypeset ran 37 pages. Every Snook 1866 page 11, okay, that you will ever see is a 2015 page number. So I'm just telling you, okay, the details of the evidence. I would not use this as full evidence proof. I don't think it is. I think it's a little bit out there. Okay. One more thing though. Their quotations of her sentences, okay, the ones that Snook reads, okay, it reads almost endless varieties of species and in certain races of men. They actually drop a part of Ellen White's own words of animals. And so Snook's error in 1866 or a modern transcriber, I don't know who it is. Okay. I'm not sure who it is. There is an error in it. Okay. The of animals is the exact phrase that Nichol's kind of whole defense rests on. So a critic quoting that short version would be like, you're smoking crack. I don't know what you're talking about. It's spurious. Thank you. Okay. So again, I share this and I don't share this to poison the well. I've already been accused for that. Why would you show it if you don't think you, It's historical evidence. This is part of the argument. That's the reality. Okay. So you can look at it, you can study it yourself. I personally don't use Snook as part of my viable case, personally. Okay. Okay. So let's start with Nichol again, because he raises this issue himself. This is page 321. How easy it would have been for Mrs. White to drop off the amalgamation passages in the 1870 edition. The passages had already raised questions. That was the time to suppress them, but she reproduces the chapters containing the passages so that both the passages and the context remain the same. He's correct. I checked this. Okay, the passages are there. It's page 69, page 78, word for word. Okay, exactly the way we see them. 6 years after, I didn't even show you this. This is the quote I was reading from. 6 years after the controversy started, she reprinted them. Now, hold on just a second, okay? I want you to come forward 20 more years, okay? In 1890, she published Patriarchs and Prophets. Now, some of you may not be familiar with this, but most of her mature books were previously smaller books. They end up getting more scrapbook items, get compiled, edited, put together. They end up becoming bigger books, okay? Patriarchs and Prophets is the mature, definitive retelling of the same Genesis material from the spirit of prophecy. Okay? From the issues that we're looking at. Same chapter, same story, same author. Okay? So here's the two items kind of back to back. And I know this isn't the easiest, okay, to read. You can take a snapshot of this and you can look at it later and study it for yourself, okay? Here's the 1864 edition, okay? Cause them to look upon the blood of human beings with astonishing indifference. But if there was one sin above another which called for the destruction of the race of the flood, it was the base crime of amalgamation of man and of beast, which defaced the image of God and caused confusion everywhere. God purposed to destroy by a flood that powerful, long-lived race. Now, notice in the mature telling, what does she do? It's gone, ripped out. This is 1890, absolutely ripped out. So the surrounding sentences survive. Astonishing indifference, right? Astonishing indifference. But then instead of talking about this amalgamation stuff, the world was in its infancy. In fact, the sentence that followed it in 1864 is completely gone. It's just not. Even the 1870 that was reprinted is gone. Now, this is the first segment. The same exact thing happens again. (1864). Every species of animal which God had created, there's the instance of amalgamation. What happens? You have the rainbow paragraph, okay? And then it's just gone, disappeared. As Noah looked upon the powerful beasts of prey, like, let's just forget about this. I thought it was visionary. I thought it was something God had given. Both of these slots that were preserved 1864 preserved to 1870, and then they just gone in 1890. Amalgamation doesn't appear anywhere, gone. Neither does confused species. Neither does base crime. None of them there. None of them. This is normal editorial work inside the Adventist institution. It's a pattern. And we can tell by looking at history, the surrounding sentences survive the rewrite in both places. The amalgamation issue, which clearly was a problem, okay, a doctrine that in 1864 was the climactic explanation of the flood. Guess where she got it from? But then by 1890, it is gone, obliterated. Absolutely crazy. Now, Nichol's own defense, okay, guess what Nichol's going to say? I love some of these comments. Ninja vanish. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, here's what's crazy. You know what Nichol's response to this is? Nichol's response, his own defense of her is, she didn't suppress it. She reprinted it in 1870. That's all he says. And the comical part is, yeah, that's true. She did stop at that point. At that point. But that ain't all the story, friends. That is not all the story. Let's move on to the next segment. Now, if amalgamation were the only thing, you could call it kind of a strange page, in a long life with Ellen White. It is not, okay? The second passage is even harder because nothing in this next passage is ambiguous at all. Nothing. And we're just going to go straight into it. This is taken from Ellen Early Writings, page 276. Again, I'm going to read a few things just for keeping it on one page, the core problem. I'm going to read a larger section of it. She says this on page 276. I saw that the slave master will have to answer for the soul of his slave, among whom he has kept in ignorance, and the sins of the slave will be visited upon the master. God cannot take to heaven the slave who has been kept in ignorance and degradation, knowing nothing of God or the Bible, fearing nothing but his master's lash, and holding a long position than the brutes, a lower position than the brutes. But he does the best thing for him that a compassionate God can do. He permits him to be as if he had not been. While the master must endure the 7 last plagues and then come upon in the second resurrection and suffer the second most awful death, then the justice of God will be satisfied. What the what? What is going on here? The slave is not saved. That's what she says. The slave is not saved. The slave is not damned. The slave is annihilated. permitted to be as if he had not been. And this is the best of a compassionate God that Ellen White can muster in her gospel understanding of who God is. And the reason given is that, well, the slave was kept in ignorance. The man who kept him in ignorance, of course, the slave master, well, he's the one that has to bear the horrible reality of the second death. Now, this passage does have a history. And so we will look at the history of this passage. It first appears in Spiritual Gifts, Volume 1, 1858. This is page 193. And I've placed it beside, again, the 1882 edition, or the 1882 text. Notice some of the differences here. The top one, and not holding so elevated a position as his master's brute beasts, he lets him be as though he had not been. Then the wrath of God will be appeased. And secondly, in holding a lower position than the brutes, then the justice of God will be satisfied. So two changes, 24 years apart. Notice the slight change, right? The comparison, notice that there was a comparison to the master's livestock. That is softened. The wrath of God will be appeased, becomes the justice of God will be satisfied. Nobody was reading this carefully. Somebody is smoothing this over. Whoever it is. I don't know exactly who it is. But the 1882 edition also adds an editorial note. This editorial note actually points to a note the White Estate prints in the back of the book. Here's what it says. This is page 276, Slaves and Master. And it says, according to Revelation 6, 15 and 16, there will be slavery at the second advent of Christ. Here we find the words every bondman and every free man. The statement by Ellen White under discussion indicates that she was shown in vision the slave and the slave master at the second advent of Christ. In this, she is in perfect accord with the Bible. Perfect accord with the Bible. While it is true that Negro slaves in the United States were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, the message is not made invalid. For even today, there are millions of men and women in actual or virtual slavery in different parts of the world. This is the defense. She's seeing a future generic slavery, not American chattel slavery. No, that's not what she's seeing. Of course not. Now, friends, just ask whether that survives contact with the actual passage. Fearing nothing but his master's. Like, read this previous, fearing nothing but his master's lash. That doesn't survive. In fact, the chapter's immediate context, if you read it, which everyone tells me, hey, Mike, you're reading Ellen White out of context. The chapter's immediate context is an indictment of American churches. Here's what it says. His wrath burns against this nation and especially against the religious bodies that have sanctioned this terrible traffic. This is 1858 in America, about America. And notice what the appendix doesn't say. It doesn't address the annihilation. It doesn't address any of that. They are just making this stuff up. They're just making it up. Now, I do want, again, to point out something that critics usually don't address or cover. And this is in 1891. In March of 1891, Ellen White read a testimony to about 30 church leaders in the General Conference in Battle Creek. And its title is Our Duty to the Colored People. Now, it later became actually the opening piece of a book called The Southern Work. It is the best thing she ever wrote on this particular subject. And it is way better than what most white American Christians were saying at this particular time. In fact, I'm going to read, let me go here real quick. I'm going to read this segment here. This is taken out of Southern Work. Who is it that held these people in servitude? Who kept them in ignorance and pursued a course of debase and brutalized them, forcing them to disregard the law of marriage, breaking up the family relation, tearing wife from husband and husband from wife? If the race is degraded, if they were repulsive in habits and manners, who made them so? Is there not much due to them from the white people? After so great a wrong has been done them, should not an earnest effort be made to lift them up? Moving to page 15. Sin rests upon us as a church because we have not made greater effort for the salvation of souls among the colored people. You have no license from God to exclude the colored people from your place of worship. Treat them as Christ's property, which they are, just as much as yourselves. They should hold membership in the church with the white brethren. Every effort should be made to wipe out the terrible wrong which has been done them. I'm not sure if this is the next one. Yep. Let me make sure this is... At the same time, we must not carry things to extremes and run into fanaticism on this question. Some would think it right to throw down every partition wall and intermarry with the colored people, but this is not the right thing to teach or practice. And I want a little bit further. I don't have the slide, I don't think, for it, but it says the black man's name is written in the book of life beside the white man's name. All are one in Christ. Birth, station, nationality, or color cannot elevate or degrade men. The character makes the man. So, in the American South in 1891, okay, that particular sentence would probably get a man shot, killed. And so I'm not going to let anyone tell you that Ellen White was just plain and simply racist. I think she had problems. Again, because I don't think she was a prophetess. I don't think she was of God. She had problems. Okay. That doesn't mean some things she wrote wasn't maybe better than others. But honesty runs both ways. Remember, at the same time, we must not carry things to extreme fanaticisms. Run into fanaticism to that question. Some would think it right to throw down every partition wall and intermarry with the colored people. But this is not the right thing to teach or to practice. So even though she's at least making some statements that probably would get her in trouble, she's also claiming that you should not intermarry. That intermarriage is not a practice that is of God. So you can't have it both ways. You just can't, friends. Now, here is what most treatments, again, get wrong. I'm just going to kind of engage. I want to make sure I'm on the right slide for this. Okay, here's what some of them get wrong. The reversal is usually told as 1891 to 1909. Idealism to accommodation. A slow drift is the way it usually gets told over 18 years. Friends, it is not a slow drift. This is dateable. The date is 1899. And she's actually in Australia in 1899. This is June 5th, 1899, written to A.F. Ballinger, not the same E.S. Ballinger, A.F. Ballinger from Carangbong, New South Wales. And it says, this is how it goes. Any mingling of the white people with the colored people, as sleeping in their houses or showing them friendship, as would be shown by the white to those of their own color, is exacerbating to the white people of the South. And then she goes on. This is actually manuscript 90. She says, common association with the blacks is not a wise course to pursue. To lodge with them in their homes may stir up feelings in the minds of the whites, which will imperil the lives of the workers. The breaking down of distinction between the white and the colored races unfits the blacks to work for their own class and exerts a wrong influence on or upon the whites. Eight years after they should hold membership in the church with the white brethren. So, guys, just understand, this is the reason that she can't be getting all of this stuff from God. She is flip-flopping. She's making statements. She's going one way with one thing. She's saying you shouldn't associate it over here. And I know that every well-intentioned Adventist is going to somehow accommodate her for something. Oh, you're just treating her too harshly. Friends, we're dealing with things. Remember, we are dealing with things that originated out of the visionary register of Ellen White. These are not just suggestions. Now, let me suggest as to why some of the honest reading changed. Okay. She gives kind of the reason herself. And the reason is not they're lesser. The reason is danger. That's what she claims, okay? This is what always, like, Adventist apologists, Mike, you just don't understand the time that she was in, right? There was real things going on. She was just giving counsel. So listen, lynching was at its historic peak in exactly these years. In fact, her son, Edson, was running a mission boat down the Mississippi, and workers were being threatened. So in her own frame, I get it. She's protecting the people. Okay, I get it. That's a fair defense. I'm not going to take it away out of its historical relevance, okay? But again, out of a fair defense, notice what it costs. If the council changed to in response to conditions on the ground, then the council was responsive to conditions on the ground. That is how prudent leaders behave. It's how the tradition describes the source of her instruction. Okay? So just understand the cost. If you're going to go that route, Adventist, then understand what the cost is. Now, here's what we get to. There's 4 quotations that I want to move to here. The first one is in 1909. Okay. Testimonies for the Church. I'm giving you short excerpts. I apologize. These are a little bit smaller on the screen. You can go back, screenshot them. You can look at them yourself. I'm giving you 4 instances here. Okay. 1909, Testimonies of the Church, Volume 9, Section 6, under Among the Colored People. This is where the 1899 Council is effectively codified for the entire church. Okay. This is Volume 9. This is page 202. But for several reasons, white men must be chosen as leaders. Then on page 206, the mingling of whites and blacks is social equality was by no means to be encouraged. Then she goes on, I'll read a larger segment on page 206. In regard to white and colored people worshiping in the same building, this cannot be followed as a general practice without profit to either party, especially in the South. The best thing will be to provide the colored people who accept the truth with places of worship of their own. Lastly, she says on page 208, where demanded by custom or where greater efficacy is or efficiency is to be gained, let the white believer and the colored believers assemble in separate places of worship. Now, the sentence that does the most damage here is on page 214. And here's what it says. The colored person, the colored people, should not urge that they be placed on an equality with white people. The relation of the two races has been a matter hard to deal with, and I fear that it will ever remain a most perplexing problem. So far as possible, everyone that would stir up the race prejudice of the white people should be avoided. Should be avoided. Now, I do have to just mention, because of my research, okay, I just have to mention this, okay? Usually the framing here, this is what you'll usually hear. Volume 7 is the equality volume. Volume 9 is the segregation volume. And she reverses herself between 1902 to 1909. Okay, usually that's the framing. That framing is wrong. Don't use it. Okay, if you use it, you're just not understanding the historical exchange here. Okay, look what else is in volume 9. Same section, 9 pages after. She says, should not urge that they be placed on an equality. So there is, just pay attention as to how you're framing some of this in response to the interaction itself. Now, here is the real engagement. This is on page 223. The religion of the Bible recognizes no caste or color. It ignores rank, wealth, worldly honor. God estimates men as men. With him, character decides their worth. and we are to recognize the Spirit of Christ in whomsoever it is revealed. No one need be ashamed to speak with an honest black man in any place or to shake him by the hand. Now, page 192 says, exact and impartial justice is to be shown to the Negro race. Page 180 says, the colored line will be regarded by many very differently from the way in which it is now regarded. He who is closely connected with Christ is lifted above the prejudice of color or caste. Now, this is the real exhibit. It's not volume 7. The real one that you want to work out is volume 9. Volume 9 against itself. So you don't get the whole confusion. Just pay attention to these differences. Just read on the screen. I'll let you read them. Just read them across. The mingling of whites and blacks in social equality was by no means to be encouraged. Then we have, he who is closely connected with Christ is lifted above the prejudice. Let the white believer and the colored believer assemble in separate places of worship. And then exact and impartial justice is to be shown to the Negro race. The colored people would not urge that they be placed on an equality with the white person. And then the religion of the Bible recognizes no caste or color. No one needs to be ashamed to shake him by the hand. Now, this is a little bit harder to explain. It's not easy. A prophet who changes her mind between 1902, that's the time frame, and 1909, well, is a prophet who changed her mind. A prophet who changed her mind is a prophet who changed her mind. A single volume holding both the eternal principle and its practical, or its practical suspension, 20 pages apart, is something entirely different, holding a theological conviction and a social calculation at once, and then letting that calculation govern the practice. That is exactly what a thoughtful, decent, frightened human would probably do in 1909. That is not what a divine, got her stuff from the divine visionary register. That's not what it would describe. She contradicts herself, friends. And most of this is from and can be taken from the visionary. Remember, all the way back to the first statement about the debasing of the humankind and the intermingling of races and all this stuff. It all works together. Which brings us to the man who said this out loud. This is Charles Bradford. Charles Bradford, president of the North American Division until his retirement in 1990, one of the most respected African-American leaders the denomination has even ever produced. In May of 1996, the Seventh-day Adventist Review ran a 40-page special called Meet Ellen White for Yourself. It's a celebration. It's a defense issue. Bradford's essay sits in the middle on pages 30 and 31. He is not attacking her. He begins by saying, Black Adventists in general, this is a Black Adventist writing, a Black Adventists in general have high regard for Ellen White. They look upon her as a mother and a counselor, a prophet of the Lord. And goes on and says, there has never been a major attack on the spirit of prophecy launched from within the African American Adventist community. And then, having said that, he says the following. Now, until the 1920s and 30s, when blacks began to think about their position in the church and to protest against segregation, some leaders used her Volume 9 statements as frozen texts that were for all time. Many black people were very incensed, and some lost their way over this. In order to remain Adventists, they had to develop a hermeneutic for interpreting Ellen White. The other alternative was to accept their status and be Uncle Toms. Goes on and says, I think that's one of the main reasons that blacks have not had as much of a problem with Ellen White and her use. They have developed a hermeneutic for her. They look on her as a fine mother, a good counselor, but they could not take every word she said as being eternal in its application and universal for all time. They had to make some adjustments in it. They had to, or they could not remain Adventists and be honest people. Catch that last statement. They had to make adjustments in it, or they could not remain Adventists and be honest people. I will applaud and amen that last part. That is not my sentence. This is not a critic's sentence. This is a retired president of the North American division in the church's own magazine in a celebration issue describing what it cost black Americans to stay Adventist. Now, one more thing, and I include this because I would want someone to do the same for me. Okay, this is Bradford's own framing, is volume 7 versus volume 9, and it contrasts. I just told you about not to use. Okay, he writes that volume 7 speaks of, quote, their names being together in the book of life, and that shouldn't be a shame to shake hands on the street. Neither phrase is in volume 7. The Book of Life is Southern. It's the Southern Work volume. He also writes that she said not to cut off the ears of the white people by fraternizing too freely with blacks. I searched every Ellen White book and the complete letters and manuscripts corpus. Cut off the ears. Well, that's her idiom. Okay, it occurs 8 times, always about presenting unpopular doctrine or dress reform, too bluntly to a prejudiced audience. Not once was it actually about race. That sentence is Bradford's compression in her voice, and that one is a direct quotation of her that carries the wrong page. He was wrong. It just is what it is. I'm not scoring against a dead individual. But this is a senior leader working from memory, I would imagine, or maybe even he is holding the volumes in his hand and he just got it wrong. I don't really know, but just a few things to be aware of with regards to his official position on that. All right, well, let's get into now the much endured 4th segment, the one you all have been waiting for. Okay, we are going to change the register for just a second. And we are actually going to move into from the books to the courtroom. The Great Disappointment is October 22, 1844. 4 months later, okay, February of 1845. And I love the comment. This is about to get weird. 4 months later, in 1845, Ellen Harmon is 17. She has been having visions since December. She has not yet met the man that she will eventually marry. That is a year away. So let's describe the meeting. This is Saturday evening, February 15, 1845. It was at the house of James Eyre Jr. Atkinson in Piscataquis County, Maine. There was an arrest that occurred. Deputy Sheriff Joseph Moulton the following day. The trial itself was Monday and Tuesday, February 17 and 18, 1845, where they were arraigned before Moses Sweat, Esquire of Foxcroft, and Seth Lee, Esquire of Atkinson. It was adjourned to the Dover courthouse. There was 38 testifying witnesses, 20 for the state, 18 for the defense. The record that you can go read is from a magazine called the newspaper called Piscataquis Farmer. I actually have this episode in my archives. Volume 3, number 31, Friday morning, March 7, 1845, roughly 7 columns. Now, this is the earliest account of Ellen Harmon in vision that we know of to this date. This is the earliest. This actually is the first visionary account that we have that exists. In a sworn testimony taken down in a courtroom, published 3 weeks later. The evidence is fresh and needs you be reminded. Journalism back then was not the type of journalism we had today. The reporter at the head of this report says this: to the witnesses, I will say this: I have abridged your testimony as much as possible and have omitted much of the most unimportant part in order to shorten the work, but have endeavored in no case to misrepresent you. And if you find an error, I beg you to impute it to my head instead of heart. To all, I offer it as an imperfect and impartial report. In consequence of my total inexperience, being but a laboring man, I should shrink from publishing it, but from the urgent solicitation of others, thanking the court for the favor of a seat by them, and the court and counsel for the use of their minutes. I sign myself this once, the reporter, N.B. I have preserved the language of the witnesses as much as possible. Now, what the document is not. You will see this document called a transcript. It's actually not a transcript. Ronald Numbers calls it actually the published transcript of a trial. And Taves, who I've read as well, calls it a reporter's transcript. Bull and Lockhart call it the court transcript. Bruce Weaver, which we'll get to, who did the fullest study on it, calls it a 124 column inch abridgment of the court's reports transcript filed with verbatim reporting. That is much more accurate. It is not a transcript, and it cannot be considered a transcript. And the reason is a technical reason. This is taken out of Kevin Burton, Journal of Adventist Archives, page 28. In the United States, court reports did not contain verbatim or paraphrased testimony from the witnesses until after the Civil War. Such action was not possible because reporters prior to this time did not have the ability to write down words at the rate of speech. So the first known use of shorthand in an American courtroom is 1866. That is 21 years after this trial. Before that, American courts relied on the judge's notes. That is what the reporter meant by the minutes. And he goes on and says, nevertheless, it seems he did a good job in his approximations, and the general details found in the Farmer are reliable, even though the document is not an abridgment of a verbatim court transcript. Though the reporter for the Piscataquis Farmer, that's the newspaper, balanced the testimony of the prosecution and the defense, his public report provide motivation for further acts of religious intolerance. So everything I quote from this document tonight is, to be very, very clear, is a near contemporary summary of sworn testimonies taken down by hand by a self-described laboring man from his own notes and from the court's minutes and printed 3 weeks later. How's that for serious steel manning the position? This is a serious historical source. It is not a stenographic report or record, and I won't call it that. Now, here is the same scholar. He says this in the very top part. I'll read it again. Nevertheless, it seems he did a good job. Now, who's Kevin Burton? Friends, this is from the Journal of Adventist Archives. This is an Adventist making the claim on this. Kevin Burton on the article on Israel Damon, Millerism, and religious intolerance. This is reasonably recent. Kevin Burton, this is written in 2024 in the Journal of Adventist Archives. It's refereed and published by the General Conference's own Office of Archives, Statistics and Research. So he's not defending the trial's outcome. His article argues the whole prosecution was religious intolerance. And we're going to get to that. So the wording is the reporters. The substance is reliable. And that is not my opinion. That is the church's own current scholarship. And it is the ground I stand on for the absolute rest of this part of the segment. It also disposes of the older Adventist answer, which is Paul Gordon's in 1987, that the reporter had confessed his own unreliable. That is hogwash. That is falsification. He had not done that, and the reporter recorded a defense that witnesses joke and write. Listen, this is not a hatchet job. Paul Gordon did not give good information in 1987. If you know who Paul Gordon is, I'm not going to even bring him up, okay? This is good work. And even 2024 research shows it by the Adventist institution itself. Now, the charge is usually summarized as vagrancy and disturbing the peace. That's usually the charge. But here's the complaint in the article. I'll read some additional stuff. This is Hartford J. Rowe of Dover. In the Piscataquis Yeoman, upon his oath, complains that Israel Damon, commarant, you can tell I'm not an attorney, of Atkinson, is said county, and for several days last past has been a vagabond and idle person, going about in the town of Atkinson from place to place, begging, that he, the said Israel Damon, is a common relayer or brawler, neglecting his calling or employment, misspending his earnings, and does not provide for support of himself, family. Now, Damon pleads not guilty. Now to the piece that changes kind of what the trial actually is about and why we're even talking about it, okay? The complaint quotes the last lines of chapter 179, section 9 in the revised statutes of the state of Maine. Here's the whole section. Listen to the company Israel Damon is being placed in. All rogues, vagabonds, and idle persons going about in any town or place in the county, begging, or persons using any subtle craft, juggling, or unlawful games or plays, or for the sake of gain, or emolument, feigning themselves to have knowledge in physiognomy, palmistry, or for the like purpose, pretending that they can tell destinies or futures, or, and they go on, or discover where lost of stolen goods, so on and so forth. Common pipers, fiddlers, runaways, common drunkards, common night walkers, pilferers, persons wanted or lascivious in speech or behavior, common railers or brawlers. Common pipers, fiddlers, night walkers. A 19th century catch-all. This is a catch-all for people in a town that literally they want to get rid of these people. They're doing no good, okay? But look at the clause in the middle, pretending that they can tell destinies or fortunes. Now, Kevin Burton again, as a lawyer, Crosby knew that Chapter 178, Section 9 of the Revised Statutes of the State of Maine prohibited prophetic activity and realized that Harmon's visit might provide an opportunity to end Millerite activity in the area. Hold that. We're going to come back to it in just a second, okay? Now, why did the town care? Well, Benjamin Smith, who is a selectman of Atkinson, he says, I have been called upon the citizens of Atkinson to interfere and put a stop to these meetings. They gave as a reason that the defendant and others were living upon certain citizens of said town and that they were liable to become town charged. Now, the defense witness, which is George Woodbury, asked directly by the court, says, well, Elder Damon advises us not to work because there is enough to live on until the end of the world. So notice what's going on. Okay. Now to the arrest. When I went to arrest the prisoner, Israel Damon, they shut the door against me. I burst open the door. A number of women jumped on him. He clung to them and they to him. So great was the resistance that I with 3 assistants could not get him out. We made a second attempt with the same result. I again sent for more help. We were resisted by both men and women. Can't describe the place. It was one continued shout. So notice what the report says. 3 attempts, 3 waves of reinforcements, a forced door. Now to William C. Crosby, an attorney, 37 years old, who was in the room from about 7 until 9 o'clock, says this: there was a woman on the floor who lay on her back with a pillow under her head. She would occasionally arouse up and tell a vision, which she said was revealed to her. They would at times all be talking at once, hallowing at the top of their voices. They were sitting and laying on the floor promiscuously and were exceedingly noisy. Now, 3 defense witnesses went on record agreeing with him, agreeing with this statement that you see on the screen. One said, I agree with Crosby and Lambert substantially. Another said, I agree with the testimony being correct. Mason said, I have heard Crosby testify and I think him correct. So the question now is, who was the woman on the floor? You see it right here. A woman, she was occasionally aroused, television, they were sprawling around, all this crazy stuff. This is straight up Nutville. And who is the woman? Well, a defense witness, James Iyer Jr., which is the owner of the house, says this: saw the woman with the pillow under her head. Her name is Miss Ellen Harmon of Portland. Another defense witness, Jacob Mason. I thought her visions were from God. She would describe out their cases correct. She described mine. Sister Harmon is 18 or 19 years of age. She was in Portland or from Portland. Now, how long was she on the floor? Lowton Lambert, on direct and again on cross examination, says the following, and I'm going to read the larger context. Imitation of Christ lay on the floor during the time they went down to the water to baptize, and she continued on the floor until I left, which was between the hours of 12 and 1 o'clock at night. Cross-examined. The visionist lay down on the floor, I should think about 7 o'clock. She lay there from that time until I left. Roughly 5 hours. And Joel Dorr, for the defense, tells you what filled it. Miss Hammond, the reporter's spelling of Harmon, told 5 visions Saturday night. James White is in the record too. He is never called James. The witnesses say Elder White. Harvey, which is for the state, says Damon, White, and Hall were all leaders. A defense witness, Jacob Mason, says, I saw Elder White near Sister Harmon in a trance. Some of the time, he held her head. She was in a vision. Part of the time, insensible. And Lambert, on cross-examination, reporting what the group said, says that Dammon said Christ revealed to her and she to others. They said if the Almighty had anything to say, he revealed it to her. And she acted as mediator. She acted as mediator. A prosecution witness reporting the group's own claim, and not one defense witness contradicts it. They all affirm it. Mason says, I thought her visions were from God. Gallison, I have no doubt Sister Harmon's visions were from God. Woodsbury, I believe in Miss Harmon's vision because she told my wife's feelings correctly. Now to the part of the record that's the hardest to hear. And I quote, the imitation of Christ, as they call her, would lay on the floor a while, then rise up and call upon someone and say she had a vision to relate to them, which she would relate. There was one girl that they said must be baptized that night, or she must go to hell. She wept bitterly and wanted to see her mother first. They told her she must leave her mother or go to hell. One voice said, "Let her go to hell." She finally concluded to be baptized. You have a young child weeping, asking to see her mother, told that she can't see her mother before she's baptized or else she'll go to hell. This is all envisioned from Ellen Harmon. And a voice in the room saying, "Let her go to hell." Now, Joel Dorr, for the defense, confirms the scene without any cruelty. He says, Brother Gallison's daughter wanted to see her mother before she was baptized, but finally concluded to be baptized without seeing her. And then says the girls that was baptized were about 17 years old. So a prosecution witness reporting a threat is one thing. That is not what happens. Watch what happens next. This is the defense witness under cross-examination. She told them their cases had been made known to her by the Lord, and if they were not baptized that evening, they would go to hell. We believed her and Brother Damon, and I advised them to be baptized. He's literally explaining it. He believed her. So, of course, he advised them. Now you have George Woodsbury, defense witness, whose wife was one of the women. It was said, and I believe, that Sister Harmon and Baker's revelations, as much as though they came from God, Sister Harmon said to my wife and the girls, if they did not do as she said, they would go to hell. 3 witnesses. 1 for the state, 2 for the defense. All 3 describe the same thing. The 17-year-old visionary telling people if they didn't obey her, they would go to hell. That this is a room of people who had just watched the entire world end. Remember that. Frightened, exhausted. They were uncertain. You have a teenager on the floor. The teenager on the floor is not the villain in the story. In most readings, she is the most venerable, vulnerable person in it. But the record is the record, and the record says the threats came from her. You don't obey her, you will go to hell. Now, you will have noticed a phrase that I've been kind of leaving alone, and I'm going to deal with it in just a second because it needs to be dealt with. Imitation of Christ. Lambert calls the woman on the floor imitation of Christ. He actually says it 6 times. It's a shocking phrase. It's concerning. It's probably quoted. You've probably heard it, possibly. Here is what is true, okay? Who said it? Well, I heard something, and these are the quotes. I heard nothing said by her or others except or about imitation of Christ. Do not call Sister Harmon imitation of Christ. Sister Harmon was not called imitation of Christ, to my knowledge. I think I should have heard it if she was. Do not hear her called. Again, there's these denials, okay, of what's happening. So you have certain people claiming that she was called. You have other people saying that, no, she wasn't called that. And no sentence in the trial report, okay, Ellen White was called imitation of Christ. This is just reporting the information. This is a very confusing incident. In fact, the incident itself is complete mayhem. Like, this is shouting Methodist, crazy stuff. This is not of God. I can tell you right now, this is not of God. This is the beginning stages of the acclaimed Ellen G. White that the Adventist Church holds so highly. This is witchcraft, friends. This is absolute horrific stuff. Now, there is a newspaper digest from Portland Advisor that was printed that April, okay, that flat out says blasphemously called the imitation of Christ. Her name was Ellen Harmon. So there are all kinds of like speculations. There's all kinds of potential, okay? It's irrelevant if this phrase is actually what they called her during this. It wouldn't be surprising because of the absolute, like the disgusting nature of what was going on and what she was saying and how it was happening. Okay. But here's kind of where I land. And I think she was the one they called it. I think. I can't prove it, but I do think people here were calling her this. And maybe some didn't want to call her it. I don't know. It doesn't really matter, okay? But here's what you have. You have the defense names her on the floor as Miss Ellen Harmon, okay? The state times her there from 7 till 12 to 1 o'clock. That's a long time. She's on the floor in trance, doing all kinds of crazy stuff, head back, railing, all this crazy stuff, telling people that they're going to go to hell. Okay? The defense counts the visions, told 5 visions Saturday night. The defense puts James White beside her. Some of the time held her head. The defense confirmed the health threats that came from her. None of these are disputed. It's actually irrelevant if some called her imitation of Christ and some didn't. It's irrelevant, but it does point to the absolute confusion and absolute ungodly nature, witchcraft, crazy mesmerism junk that was happening. And this is the very first visionary statement, very first vision experience that we have of Ellen White. Do you think it was of God? Do you think it was of God? Now, I don't have to argue, okay, that this case on my own. There are 4 Adventist historians that did all of this literally 39 years ago. August of 1987, there was a Spectrum print that came out called Hoyt's Recovery of the Trial Report. And immediately after it, there was a roundtable. Frederick Hoyt of Loma Linda, who found the document. There was Jonathan Butler, Rennie Schäuflin, and Ronald Graybill, who had spent 13 years on the staff at the Ellen G. White estate. I want you to listen to what they concluded in regards to this entire situation. This is Graybill. It seems to me that the defense witnesses corroborate virtually all that the prospective witnesses charge, with the exception of the charge that Ellen White was referred to as the imitation of Christ. Hoyt, that's right. That enigmatic expression is the only exception. So we accept Elder Damon's testimony at the trial as essentially accurate. You can't say this isn't accurate. Their own defense supports it. This is the whole architectural structure of this. And just understand the defense corroborates virtually all of it, with one exception. And the exception is the title. Fine. So maybe that's not what she was called. Okay, I won't build my case on it. And so we have to assume that there was some kissing going on, that there was some crawling going on, that there was some hollering and shouting going on. And Hoyt, on the objection, okay, I've been anticipating all night. These are hostile witnesses describing people that they saw destroy. Here's what Hoyt says. Ellen Harmon and James White were not on trial. There was no reason for the witnesses to attack them at all. They were simply talking about them incidentally. So I think their testimony about James and Ellen has to be taken more seriously because of that. It seems to me, when you read through it, that the witnesses were rather neutral and quite fair to Ellen and James. They didn't use colored words or loaded adjectives at all. They just described. Two more, and then we'll move on. Jonathan Butler says this: place yourself in Victorian America. You've got a young girl lying on the floor on a pillow with 6 or 7 hours at night with this hoopla going on around her. There's a lot going on here, and Ellen is a part of it. Yeah, there is a lot going on. Ron Graybill, psychologically closer to the fanaticism than we had imagined. Yeah, this transcript certainly places her psychologically closer to the fanaticism than we had ever imagined. Yeah. And this is the origin. You wonder why she had a spirit guide. You wonder why she had... Friends, this is not of God. This is not the way God works. Now, how did it all end? Elder Damon again rose from further defense. Court indulged him to speak. He read. He argued that the day of grace had gone by, that the believers were reduced, but that there was too many yet, and that the end of the world would come within a week. The court, after consultation, sentenced the prisoner to the house of correction for the space of 10 days. From this judgment, respondent appealed. Tuesday morning, the prisoner, having taken his seat, rose just as the court came in and shouted, "Glory to the strength of his lungs." A conviction, 10 days, an appeal. He never served it. His own later account says that the warrant was squashed at the May term. So 15 years later, Ellen White reports on this. You know what just happened, okay? You know what just happened in the court. Now, see how Ellen White flavors this whole thing. This is in Spiritual Gifts, Volume 2, 1860, 3 paragraphs, okay? Here they are. Here's what she writes. The charge brought against Elder D was that he was a disturber of the peace. Many witnesses were brought to sustain the charge, but they were at once broken down. A lawyer offered his services. The cost of the court, I think, was thrown upon him, and he was released. The servants of God made no resistance. What does the record say? She is an absolute liar. What does the record say? She says many witnesses were brought to sustain the charge. 38 witnesses across 2 days and a conviction. Like, this woman, the largest gap, okay, the absolute largest gap that you have to pay attention to is what is not there at all. She places herself in the room while I was speaking. That's what she says. And she never mentions the floor, the pillow, the 5 visions, the midnight baptisms, the kissing, the officer forcing the door twice, the head back with... She never mentions any of it. None of it. Gone. Again, suppressed. And in the back of that same 1860 book is the set of signed testimonies. In the back of this book is the same signed testimony that says any statements that would represent them as being in any wise connected with or contaminating in any degree those fanatical abominations into which some in Maine and elsewhere were drawn during the years of 1844 and 646 are wicked and malicious falsehoods. We have never known them to be in the least infected with the spirit or works of fanaticism. But on the contrary, Friends, this is a flat lie. She was involved in it. This is a signed testimony. We'd never known her to be a part of this. Absolute lie. And again, here's the thing that just stopped me in my tracks. 3 pages later, another signed statement vouches for Damon, actually vouches for him. One of the signatories is James Eyre, the senator. The trial was held at this individual's house. I can't believe this. Some appealed to be in vision and fell on the floor. Others were jumping around. Now, here's the part that blows me away, okay? April 17, 1901, General Conference. Ellen White reads a statement to assembled ministers, and she's reading this about a fanatical movement in Indiana. And she reaches back 56 years to explain what worried her. She's explaining this in front of a group of people. And she says this, in the period of the disappointment after the passing of the time in 1844, fanaticism in various forms arose. I went into their meetings. There was much excitement, with noise and confusion. One could not tell what was piped or what was harped. Some appeared to be in vision and fell to the floor. Others were jumping, dancing, and shouting. I bore my testimony in the name of the Lord, placing his rebuke upon these manifestations. Seriously, Ellen White? You hypocrite and you liar. You absolute liar. Some appeared to be in vision and fell on the floor. You were in vision. You fell on the floor. And the same period, Selected Messages, Book 2, page 36, she says, the Holy Spirit never reveals itself in such methods, in such a bedlam of noise. That's Ellen White. Absolute hypocrite. I agree. God does not reveal himself in this junk. And the conduct that she condemns in 1901 is the conduct the 1845 record places her at the center of. She's the witness against herself, not because anyone trapped her into it, but because she later came to see the behavior as false. That is discontinuity. I think it's possibly even hypocrisy. Why not just admit you were involved in it? Now, 3 responses you should know of, stated properly. Remember, I mentioned Paul Gordon. Paul Gordon, then the Undersecretary of the White Estate in 1987. The reporter apologizes for it not being perhaps as accurate. That's what he claims. Absolutely erroneous. Okay? The reporter was taking great pains to describe with great accuracy. Number 2, Ronald Graybill, 1987 Roundtable, offering the bystander reading. I don't know how much of this fanatic behavior went on in Portland, but in a sense, she had her own first exposure to it in Atkinson. After she went through this experience, she rode calmly to the next town with James and Sister Foss in the carriage. That's irrelevant, friends. She was a part of absolute witchcraft. I don't know how people can answer those 2 things. I don't know how they can even say that and feel like they're being honest. Here's what happens, though. We get this exact response, okay? I'm looking at my notes here, making sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. Let me make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself on this. 1 second. Here's Here's the fullest official answer that you're going to hear. This is James R. Nix. We're almost done, friends. And this is from the Another Look at Israel Damon around 2004. He names his own position at the outset. I acknowledge being an apologist for Ellen White. However, having said that, I think there is sufficient cause based upon a reasonable interpretation of the available evidence so that credible alternate conclusions can be reached regarding a variety of charges accused or accusations raised against Ellen White by our critics. By all accounts, he says, just look at this. This is from the same paper, okay? By all accounts, the Saturday night meeting was a noisy one. The state's purpose for the gathering was so that Ellen Harmon and Dorinda Baker, another visionary, could share her visions. The one agreement among the witnesses pertained to that Ellen did that night. All stated that while in vision, she lay quietly on the floor, except when she sat up to relate a vision. And then this. Due to the group's belief that Jesus would return within days, this is from James R. Nix, it was reported that Ellen urged several to be baptized that night rather than risk going to hell, a word possibly used by the reporter to summarize Ellen's comments, since nowhere else in her writings does she use such strong language. He just disputes the word hell. Friends, this happened. This happened. Now, the most serious response, we're getting close to the end. I told you this is going to be a long one. The most serious response was refereed by Kevin M. Burton. And we've already looked at this, okay? These are the old answers from the 1980s. There's a much better one, I think, and it's 2 years old. This is from 2024. And here is his response. Though many have written on this trial, much of the discussion has revolved around Ellen White and her character. This limited focus has had many aspects regarding the event to be overlooked, and it is the purpose of this article to fill in this lacunae. Further analysis reveals that he was apprehended primarily for reasons of religious intolerance. The vagrancy charge simply provided a legal precedent for an emotional regime to evict Damon from a community that considered the preaching and bodily actions of Adventists to be heretical. Well, they are heretical. The Israel Damon trial stands as a clear case of religious intolerance in America. Now, he does well defending this, okay? 4 men who have never attended a Millerite meeting turned up at a private gathering. One of them attorney who knew the statutes. 2 left early. The son of one filed the complaint, quoting that that statute a few hours later. Burton thinks they planned it. He makes this argument, okay? He also establishes the climate, and it's ugly. At least 170 Adventists committed to insane asylums. Most people don't know that. Meeting houses burned. After this trial, 2 vigilant raids, one party disguised as Indians, forcing their way into the Iyer house and threatening to tar and feather the Adventists. Like, there's some crazy stuff going on. Another party of 40 men breaking into a neighboring home days later, forcing the Millerites to swear they would never preach the second coming again. Okay, I accept all that stuff. Israel Damon was prosecuted because a town wanted to get rid of the religious indifference and all the stuff that was going on. Okay, fine. But again, read what the same article concedes. Because this is the same 40 pages. Just read what it concedes, okay? The general details found were reliable. Crosby entered the home and was shocked to see Ellen Harmon lying on the floor. Like, all these, these don't just get rid of the evidence. She mentions 2 girls by name. Woodbury and Israel Damon got down on their hands and knees and crawled across the floor. The girls baptized in icy water shortly after 11, while Harmon remained on the floor in vision until 12:30 a.m. The arrest took 40 minutes and 3 waves of men. Friends, it doesn't really matter how you cut it. Now, you get a footnote from Burton, and this is the footnote. This event is controversial because Ellen White claimed that God was the agent that resisted the deputy sheriff, while Moulton himself attested that this resistance came from several men and women who jumped on top of Damon. Despite any agreement, the two accounts pose irreconcilable problems. Acceptance of White's recollections requires a belief in miracles and supernatural manifestations, while Moulton's account raises unanswerable questions. As a result, the statements of White and Moulton leave questions unanswered. Yeah. I can tell you right now, Ellen White's upbringing in this was absolutely satanic. That's what I can tell you. This is the General Conference Archival Journal saying her own account and arresting officer's account cannot both be true. You can't have Ellen White true and the other account. Ellen White was wrong. She flat out disagreed with sworn evidence. And now the clause I asked you to hold, pretending that they can tell destinies and fortunes. Here is what it meant on February 1845. Though the sexual and blasphemy charges were refuted, Damon was pronounced guilty on the basis of illegal fanaticism of his meetings. Harmon and Baker's pretended destiny telling and his continual preaching of the no work doctrine. Many of the allegations were shown to be false, but a key component of Damon's conviction was Harmon and Baker's illegal act of pretended destiny telling, even though Damon did not receive or relate any visions himself. Notice who's saying that. This is an Adventist historian in the church's own referee journal, 2024, establishing that Ellen Harmon's visions were a key component of a criminal conviction, and that the man sentenced to the house of correction had received no visions himself. He was convicted. Now, here is where Burton and I part company. One distinction, okay, and not a disagreement. Burton's argument is that a statute against fortune telling should never have been aimed at a religious visionary, and that aiming it there was intolerance. Well, I agree. I would not want that statute against a Pentecostal in 1906 or a charismatic in 1975 or anyone else. Prophecy should not be a crime. Okay, I get that. But there is a claim, that is a claim about the law. It is not a claim about the visions. And the question that this series continually asks is not, should the state of Maine have prosecuted her? It is, were these visions what the tradition says they were? The 1845 record, the one we went through, Israel Damon trial, the record, and the church's own 2024 scholarship agree about the facts. A 17-year-old lay on the floor for 5 hours. She named 2 girls, told them that they had to be baptized or that's to save their souls. They went into icy water shortly after 11. Grown men crawled around the floor. Her future husband held her head while she was laying there insensible. A deputy sheriff needed 3 attempts and 11 extra men to get the preacher out. Burton says that the town should not have called that a crime. Really? I'm not asking if it's a crime. I'm asking whether or not Ellen, who was sitting on the floor making claims, claiming that she was having a vision, if she's a prophet. That's what I'm claiming. Now, to the final segment. All right, friends, we're getting really close. We're getting very close to the end. And we're going to talk about the actual verdict of the evening. Let's dive into where we're at. 3 sections here. First of all, 1864, 2 sentences in the Visionary Register. Remember, base crime, whose visible product includes certain races of men. The church's own defense establishes that that word meant racial intermarriage. Its best defense conceded she never explained the phrase. That gets reprinted in 1870, and then it is redacted and ripped out of her future books in 1890. A slave annihilated rather than saved, softened between 1858 and 1882. The finest anti-racist writing of her career is in 1891, with its own limit on the same page. A clearly dateable turn in their position in 1899. A 1909 volume holding the eternal principle and its practical suspension 20 pages apart. Then we move to a courtroom in 1845. 38 witnesses, a conviction, a 17-year-old visionary at the center of a meeting whose conduct she would spend the rest of her life condemning. Set against her own three-paragraph account, which gets the charge. The witnesses, the counsel, and the verdict, which gets them wrong. Well, the standard is hers. What does she say? My work for the past 30 years bears the stamp of God or the stamp of the enemy. There is no halfway about it. She would not let anyone take the middle ground here. Remember, the middle is exactly where the tradition, the Adventist system, has to live. That's where Bradford, as we just saw, that's where Bradford said out loud that Black Adventists have to live, or they could not remain Adventists and be honest people. So let me state the verdict that I think, in as plain as possible that I possibly can. On the fruits test, the Adventist tradition itself names this record does not sustain the claim that Ellen White met all the biblical tests of a true prophet. That is laughable. Not because she was necessarily a bad woman and did horrible things, but because the claim is actually too large for what the documents show. What the documents show, what the receipts show, is a 19th century American woman of real moral courage on some days and absolute real moral failure on others, whose early ministry was formed inside a fanatical movement, inside the very thing that she claimed later was not of God, and who spent decades growing out of it. It's a serious person. It's a real person. She had major influence. But she most certainly was not a prophet. And she absolutely had false prophecies. Now, just a word before we finish. If you are watching and you are a Black Adventist watching, an African American Adventist watching, you have known probably about Volume 9 for a long time. You probably didn't need me to rehash this out. What Bradford described, the hermeneutic, the adjustment, the cost of stain, I acknowledge could be your family's history. And I don't say that lightly. I've tried all night to handle this delicately. If for some reason my tone was off in any way, shape, or form, reach out to me. Connect with me. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your story. I would love for you to join the Discord channel and share your experience. And to every Adventist watching, the painful part of this record does not unwrite the rest of that formation. Steps to Christ is still a book that many people love. The person who taught you to pray was not necessarily lying to you, but it stems from hypocrisy and deception. Whatever was real in all of your upbringing, I understand, I acknowledge, I get it. This has real, intimate connection to your spiritual journey. But that does not run through the claim. Remember, we are testing the Spirit. It doesn't run through the claim that what I'm trying to ask of this woman, the writing, and the claim made about the writing. Remember, Bradford separated them. He stayed. Many of you may. This is not my call. I could not stay. I couldn't stay knowing that the institution was built on satanic beginnings. And what I'm asking is only this: read your own history. Read it, not the summary, not someone else's summary of it. Open to volume 9. Read page 214. Then turn to page 223. Sit with the actual facts of what it is that she's saying. Open Spiritual Gifts, volume 3, to page 75. Then read Patriarchs and Prophets, page 106, and see the information disappear, and all claiming that it came from the Visionary Registry. The documents are yours. They're your history. They were mine. They aren't now. They'll always be there. Next week, next session, we will be working through the lesser light, greater light conversation when the estate said the quiet part out loud. Today, we've kind of surfaced a hermeneutic. Next time, we're going to look directly at it. We're going to engage with George Knight, 1997, in the Official Hermeneutical Guide, Johnson in 1996 in the Adventist Review, and the 1981 Delafield letter that might surprise some of you, what the lesser light formula says in public and what the institutional practice does with it. Final thought: they had to make some adjustments in it, or they could not remain Adventists and be honest people. That is the reality from Charles E. Bradford. Honesty and belonging, and an adjustment that was required in order to hold that. A senior leader said that in the church's own magazine, in a celebration issue of Ellen White. Nobody pulled it. It's there. I do not think that sentence is an attack. I think it is the truest sentence anyone in this conversation has ever written. And the question that it leaves is whether the adjustment, the acknowledged adjustment, is a hermeneutic or an answer. To all my friends, my Adventist friends, the documents are yours. The test is yours. Apply it. Apply it honestly. We'll see you on the next one. God bless.
Mugs up, sword out, open book, let's rock. Yeah. Scroll, feed, scroll, every line on tap. Cheap grace talk, little truth in the chat. They selling feel good, cotton in the brain. We brewing strong words, snapping every chain. Thinking cup fam, pour it up, let it steep. Scripture in the filter, let the doctrine see. We don't chase trends, we expose the schemes. Test every system, pull apart the seams, yeah. False thrones fall when the text gets read. Context cuts deep, 2 edge to the head. Armor on tight, we don't play with the dark. We dissect wolves, verse by verse, line by mark, yeah. It's that battle at the thinking cup. Breaking all the chains while the book raised up. Word in my hands, let it light my path. Tearing down lies with a holy wrath. We in war at the thinking cup. Every single show bringing scripture up. Mind on the truth, let the old ways die. Let the word of God stand, let the smoke just rise. They dress up doubt in the cap and the gown. Clever little quotes trying to water faith down. We bring whole counsel, not clip, not trim. From the garden grown to the glory him. Line up, line, see the story connect. From the prophet's cry to the cross effect. We train saints up with the tools to see how the text reads us while we think we read. It's a field menu, not a bedtime tale. We equip, we correct when the filters fail. So when false light shines with a plastic glow, you can spot that twist from a mile or so. It's that battle at the thinking cup. Breaking all the chains while the book raised up. Word in my hands, let it light my path. Tearing down lies with a holy wrath. We in war at the thinking cup. Every single show bring scripture up. Mind on the truth, let the old ways die. Let the word of God stand, let the smoke just rise. Minds renewed, hearts awake. Old world shake, new path take. Eyes on Christ, systems fall. Truth stays true, that's the call. That's the call. That's the call. That's the call. It's that battle at the thinking cup. Breaking all the chains while the book raised up. Word in my hands, let it light my path. Tearing down